Hi everybody, welcome to this week's tutorial with Crochet at the Lantern. We will be learning how to do our double crochet stitch this week. Last week we did the treble crochet, and at the start of this week's tutorial clip you'll see how to tie off your work to prevent it from unraveling, so tune in for that. For our more advanced class, those of you who will be following along online, we will be making little Easter bunnies, if I can hold them up there for you to see, these little guys. There'll be just a little video tutorial for that, just a little project that you could be working on at home during this time. So again, feel free to forward any questions to Jer or Karina, and we will always do our best to try to get back to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, enjoy the crochet. So this was the end last week of our treble stitch that we learned, and the very last stitch that you come to when you're doing your practice square to finish off and to close off your work of your practice square so your work doesn't unravel. I know some of you have been asking that question and I didn't demonstrate that in the video last week. So you just draw up your loop at the end, okay, and pull through your working yarn and cut it off then from the ball of wool, okay? Cut it off the wool from the working yarn, as in the working ball that you've been using, and you have a little tail, so you can see it easy here. So you're just drawing up your loop and you're just putting it through the loop. There's nothing to it, and you just secure it then as tight as you possibly can. So that's as easy as it appears, and then you would just then, if you were making a whole load of squares, or if you were working on a project, you'll always then just sew in your yarn later on. But for now, I'm not going to show you how to do that now. We're just going to concentrate on getting our basic stitches in crochet, and then we'll work on all the extras, so to speak, after that. So this is another little square. This is the double crochet which we will be doing today now. Okay, we're going to be moving on to a new stitch. And the last week was treble, and as I mentioned already last week, once you practice and master a treble crochet, you can do any stitch in crochet really. So we're going to work on to a double crochet now today, which is easier, I find anyway, than the treble crochet. And again, you're starting with chains, and first off you'll always start with your slip knot. Whatever way you want to make your slip knot is fine. This is how I will be making mine. I'll put my hook down there a sec. So your tail is down, you make a little loop, bring it up behind so you can see it through the loop, put your hook in, draw it up, and then pull it up onto your hook. Okay, and put your tail over here then before you start working. Wrap the yarn around whatever way you want to hold the wool. The yarn in your hand is perfectly okay for starting off. So I'll do it one more time. I like to hold mine this way. Okay, and then if your loop becomes loose on your hook, make sure you just pull it up onto it. And again, we're using a 4mm hook for a double knit wool, and if you're finding that your work is really tight, that you're struggling to get into stitches, go up a hook size. So if you're a 4 and you're too tight, go up to a 5mm hook when you're starting off, just until you get a feel for it, okay? So to do our chains again, yarn around your hook, through that loop, yarn around, through the 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 loop. And whatever way you're holding it, if you're holding it, you know, not through your fingers, if you're not weaving the wool through your fingers, it's literally, you see the way that if I just let this now on its own without even trying to hold the wool or the stitches onto the hook, it's very difficult for me to create the chains when you're starting off if you're having trouble doing that. Okay, just want to point that out. So that's why it helps to hold the work as you're going along. Not too tight, just gently, and don't be squeezing your hook either, because you're going to get pains in your wrist from doing that. Just gently hold the work as you're going along. You'll find you'll be able to maneuver it easier. So yarn around, through, and just make again your series of chains for starting off. 18 to 20 is plenty just to make a little square for yourself as we're working along. And I'm not even counting now as I'm going along here, which is fine too. I'll just roughly guess. So that looks about 18 to me. And if you want to count, if you want to learn how to count your chains, we go back to where we started, and you can count from the hook back, and you could count from the beginning. So you can see the top. Look, if you push them in there, you can see the little chains that you've made. So that's how you'd count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, all the way up. Okay, and we don't count this one on the hook starting off. And then you're going to work back like we did last week, and we're going to do double crochet today. And a double crochet is very easy. You go straight into the chain, okay? I like to go into the bottom part. I think it just gives it a nicer finish for your foundation, your starting row. Other people find it easier just to catch one of the loops of the chain starting off. Entirely up to yourself, okay, at this stage. So I'm going to go in. You draw your yarn around your hook and you pull it through, and you have 2 loops on the hook. You draw the yarn around the hook again and you pull it through those 2 loops. That's your first double crochet made. Here's my next chain. In. I'm trying to do it as slowly as possible now for you. So yarn around my hook, draw that through, yarn around through the 2 loops, double crochet. So that's what it's looking like. In, I go again to the next one, yarn around through, 2 loops on my hook, yarn around through those 2 loops. In, and I'm just trying to keep the work as flat as I can for you now, just to help you see what I'm doing. So whatever way you're holding your hook is perfectly fine starting off. Some people like to hold it like a pencil, others just whatever way you find that you can master holding the hook and working your little chains as well, okay, starting off is perfectly fine, whatever makes you feel comfortable. So in we go, yarn around your hook, draw it through 2 loops, yarn around through those 2, next one, and so on and so forth until we get to the end, and then I will show you how we turn that work and start working back to make our series of double crochet. Continue that the whole way along and I'll meet you there. We're down here to the very end and I have the very last one left. So again, this was the very first one we made starting off. Don't forget to go in to that chain, okay, at the end. And it's very obvious anyway, you can see. If you didn't, it would be sticking out, okay? So in you go. And draw it through 2 loops around through 2. Now, okay, so that's what it's starting to look like. There's something sticking out there now, so no. Okay, and then we're going to make our turning chains for the double crochet. If you remember back to last week in the treble crochet, we did 3 turning chains, and our turning chain just helps us again to keep a straight edge and also helps us to turn our work and work back each row. So for the double crochet, we're going to chain 2 and we're going to turn our work. Okay, I'm going to show you that now again, how I did it and turned the work. Chain 2, 1, 2, and turn your work is literally turns around, and your tail will always be your guide. Okay, your tail will always be at the edge of your work when you're working back. Now, so if I hold that, they're the 2 chain that we added. This is what it looks like. So we're not working into the base of that, because if we do, it will increase our stitch count, okay, and we don't want to do that. But don't worry if you do, starting off perfectly normal. So we're just going to work along. If you look down now again, so I literally go in, you're catching the full stitch. You can see the top of the stitch there. If I take it out, this is what it looks like when I'm looking down on it. Ignore that little gap in the stitch there now. I didn't pull it tight enough, I'd say, when I was starting off. So we're not working in here, we're working, see look, we're not working in here, we're working into this one. Yarn around, draw it through, 2 loops, yarn around through 2. And all you're going to do, if I hold it out there, you're working along into each stitch the whole way along doing your double crochet. And just to get back to the turning chains there before I continue, starting off when you're learning, we are doing 3 turning chain for a treble, 2 for a double crochet, which is what we're doing today, okay? But as you advance and you become more familiar with your work, you can decrease the turning chains to have a neater edge on your work. And as the weeks go on, you'll be able to see that more clearly. But for starting off as a beginner, I would encourage you to do the 2 turning chain for double crochet. It just makes it a little bit easier to manage your work as a beginner. Okay, and we will advance over time as the weeks go on. So now, again, in we go. If you look down on it, that's what it looks like looking down on it. Yarn around your wool or your hook, through it, 2 loops, yarn around through 2. Next, in we go. That's what it looks like. Okay, and if you remember again back to last week, I said to you when you're working your hook, try to keep it looking at you. It's a little bit easier, but you know, it'll turn in your hand anyway when you're drawing the yarn through. If you look at the hook position there now, so we're going to go in, draw it through. It's still looking at you, the hook, that part of it, you know, and around through 2. Again, in, around, draw it through. I have 2 loops, around, finish your double crochet. Into the stitch, draw the yarn through, 2 loops on my hook, around my hook, through the 2. And this now is we're building our first row. In, that's what it looks like looking down on it. Draw it, yarn around, up again, yarn around your hook, through, yarn around through 2. In, yarn around, draw it through, 2 loops, yarn around through 2. In, yarn around, draw it in through the stitch, 2 loops on my hook, yarn around through 2. So continue that all the way to the end, and we'll start our next row, and I'll show you how to do that, and then you'll be flying at your double crochet after that. So see you at the end of this row. We're down to the end of the row, and I'm coming to the very last stitch. Do not forget that. You can actually see it very clear here. You're looking down, but if you're working that way, it mightn't be as obvious, okay? But looking down as you can see it. Hold out your work and make sure you catch that last stitch. So in with your hook, yarn around, draw it through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around through 2. Chain your 2, 1, 2, turn your work. Second there now. Now, and we're working back the row. And you're going to just continue doing the same thing, and don't forget, when you're working back the rows after chaining your 2, doing your turning chains, we don't work into the base of it. If you look at that, we don't work into the base because that'll increase our work. We're working, if I hold it out there again, we're working in here. Yarn around, draw it through, yarn around through 2. Into the next one, yarn around, draw through, 2 loops, yarn around through 2. So if I hold it out there now again, so you can start identifying your stitches, you could start counting them. So this, we're in here again, you're in this one. And again, sometimes, you know, it happens a lot in beginner's crochet. You could end up with 2 or 3 of the same stitch in the exact same space. Perfectly normal starting off if you haven't been familiar with crochet before. But to help you identify, you can always take your time when you're doing it and ask yourself the question, what stitch am I in? Open out your work a little bit so it helps identify where you are. You can see that very clear there. I'll take my hook out there a minute. We're in here. Okay? This then, if you're not sure, look down on your work. This is the next stitch, and you'll be working into that. And I'm going to put 2 stitches in here now to show you. So we're in this one already. And if I made a mistake and I went in thinking that was the next stitch, okay, I hold it out. And it mightn't seem as obvious that I have 2 stitches in here. But as time goes on, you know, it'll become very evident to say why my work looks as if it's all over the place. Again, very normal starting off, so do not be worried or concerned if your work looks a little bit wonky when you're practicing. Don't get discouraged by that. It's very, very normal, okay? So now on we go into the next one. Yarn around your hook, draw it through, yarn around through 2. In I go to the next one, and just repeating the process the whole way along. In, yarn around, 2 loops around, and you're going to work all the way to the end again. Okay, and look at your stitches on top if you're not sure. That way and that way. Okay, this way you can count them. And I don't know, have you noticed that the double crochet is a much smaller stitch, if you look closely, than the treble. Treble one is much taller, okay, because we are pretty much doing yarn around your hook about 3 times. You know, we're doing kind of 3 maneuvers in a treble, whereas in the double, if you see, in we go, it's 1 and it's 2. Okay, a treble is, if you remember from last week, yarn around, there's 3 maneuvers in a treble. 1, 2, 3. I'm going back, taking that out now. My double, it's like 2 moves, if that makes it easier for you. In, 1, 2. And continue along the whole way till you get to the end. Do your turning chain, turn your work back again. And keep going back and forwards. And then again, when we come to the end of that, it's exactly the same thing, closing off your work, which I'll show you there in a minute. Now, I've already cut my square that I was working on off of the wool, okay? And you'll be left with your tail if you remember. And I haven't gone into the last stitch yet, so I want to show you. So if you look closely, I'm in this stitch. This is my turning chain. Okay, we've been making the turning chains in each row, the 1, 2 that you've been working into. So I'm going to work into the top of that, draw it through, yarn around through my 2 loops, draw it up. Okay, catch it. You don't have to use your hook, you can use your fingers, and you're just making sure you're putting it through the loop, your tail, and you're pulling it tight. Again, stops your work from unraveling. So this is your double crochet, so you can see each row clearly here. From last week we have our treble, so I'm just going to put the 2 of them down just to give you the contrast. Okay, so look, just a taller stitch in the treble, double is a smaller stitch. Okay, you can see the rows working along, and that's last week's work, and that's this week's work. So if you just want a quick recap, so just practice your squares. That's what I would encourage you to do at the start. Practice your squares to get your edges as straight as possible, and even sometimes with my own work they can still look a little bit wonky, but don't worry a bit about that. So I'm just going to finish down to the end here for you, and I'll talk as I'm working along, just to show you one last turning chain, and then you can get practicing with that. And also I want to say, if you run short on any supplies or any wool, or you'd like different size hook, as I said, if you're finding your work is too tight for you and you need a 5mm hook and you don't have that, you can contact Karina or Jer for details with how we can help you with that. Okay, now don't forget, at the end, this is just a reminder for you now, our turning chain, we always work into the top of the turning chain from the previous row. Helps to keep our work straight, helps us turn our work so we can start working back each row. And if you're having difficulty getting in, so if I just hold it out here, this is the turning chain here. If you're having difficulty getting into that, the easiest thing to do is just hold it flat and look at it. You will see this is the top of the turning chain. Put your hook through any which way you can, just as you're starting and just as you're learning to crochet, whatever you find easier, but do not forget to crochet into the turning chain. 2 loops around, through 2. If you forget to turn into it, I'm just repeating now what I've been saying last week, but if you forget to crochet into the top of the turning chain, it's just your work is going to start going in, and then you'll get kind of frustrated with it, but stick with it, okay? Just try your best to get into the top of that turning chain. Don't forget to chain your 2 before we turn our work. So turning the work is as simple as, I'm just putting my hook back in there, turning it and working back. We're not working into the base of this one because it'll increase our work. If I hold that flat there, hold up your work, it might be easier for you to see it that way. Look, they're the 2 that we've made. We're not working into that one, we're working into this one. If I do that there, and you can see it helps to keep your work straight. That's as simple as it is. In, around, and off you go, finishing your square. And don't make it too big. It's entirely up to yourself how big you want to make it, actually. But all I would say and do is just encourage you to keep trying and make another treble square for yourself, and then go back and do the double for the week. You know, alternate your stitches, do the treble, do the double, and then once you get the hang of that, you'll be absolutely flying it, and pretty soon we can get started on a little mini project. So until then, I hope that makes sense. Any questions, feel free to forward them via email to Karina or Ger at the Lantern, and we'll do our best to help you out. Have fun!